Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my stupendous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. Today we are going to be answering your questions, our wonderful listeners. If you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, or even the queue, be sure to send those in. For the podcast, you can send those in to podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line and any special pronunciation of your name. If you are sending those on Discord, we have the Q and Podcast Questions channel where you can put those. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, you have access to the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. The same rules apply, and we ask that you, again, give us any special pronunciation of your name and tell us what show your question is for. We're just going to go ahead and get right into it as long as everybody is ready here.
I mean, it's just you and me. If we're not ready, then I don't know what we're going to do.
All right. Well, this one comes from our friend Victor. I was going to try to pronounce the Vixalink, and I think that might be correct, but you gave us both names, so there you go. You get both. This is a series of questions, and I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing out because it's a three-parter, and then we'll go back in individually and try to answer those out. So, hello again. I just reread the book Stormrage for the first time in a few years, and I've got a couple of questions tied to the book. One, at one point in the book, Malfurion saw everywhere in the world at the same time, through the newly purified Teldrassil. Do you think this included places that were obscured from the rest of the world at that time, like Pandaria or the Dragon Isles? And should we be asking Malfurion more about the rest of Azeroth? Maybe it was too much information at once and he didn't memorize it. Part 2. In the book, we find out that the tree that was Xavius was originally lost into the ocean with the Sundering, but was somehow saved and moved, presumably by N'Zoth, to the zone that is known as Azshara today. Where in Azshara do you think that tree stood, and for how long was Xavius in Azshara? The Xavius tree was mentioned to have fed upon all life in its vicinity, leaving nothing but dead soil around it. But could this have been a smaller effect over a larger area, and explain the reason for the seemingly eternal autumn in Azshara? And then question 3. The attack on the Emerald Nightmare in this book seems to have been one of the most absolute closest times for Azeroth to have nearly fallen, and the last waking people of the world seemingly only being a few hours, if not less, from losing. It's one of the few times that all of Azeroth was attacked at the same time, but we almost never hear about those events in the game, despite it being such a big deal. So many people died, and Azeroth was almost lost. Is it because it happened in a book and they don't want to confuse people who didn't read it? Why was the second attack on the Emerald Nightmare during Legion on a much smaller scale and so much weaker? Was it because Xavius didn't have access to Teldrassil this time, but he was using Sheldrassil that time instead? Was Sheldrassil not as powerful as Teldrassil? And how did Xavius survive the events in the book? The way it was written, it really felt like Xavius was gone and only the nightmare power of N'Zoth was sealed in the Rift of Aln. Lastly, if Xavius, the villain who has cheated death and come back the most amount of times in the Warcraft universe, first died in his magical battle with Malfurion, then coming back as the first satyr, then turning into a tree by Malfurion, then during Stormrage seemingly defeated and killed him for a third time, only to once again come back in Legion and be killed a fourth time. Can we truly trust that he is gone? We just can't seem to get rid of him. So let's start with the first one. What did Malfurion see when he saw the whole world? The short answer is we have no idea.
I mean, I have a really simple metaphor for you if you want to think about it a certain way. The astronauts who went to the moon saw the whole Earth. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean you could ask them questions about stuff on the ground. They're like, there were clouds and stuff. Just because he could see the entire life force of Azeroth doesn't mean that he was getting detailed topography. You know, it means that for a moment he understood Azeroth as a living system by interacting with it, essentially its dreams, which is what the Emerald Dream and the Druids have always been doing. Druids going into the Emerald Dream have always been interacting with Azeroth through its dreams. So that's where, he'd have a lot of details to tell you about Azeroth's dreamscape. Is that necessarily going to help you when you go to the Dragon Isles? Probably not, but he'd know that there was life there. But then again, would he know what that life was? Like, is he stopping to actually look at every portion of Azeroth? Just because you can see all of something doesn't mean you're stopping to look at every little bit of it. I can see all of my office, but I don't look at all of it all the time. So that's my take on it. But as Joe pointed out, this is just a take. There's nothing in that passage that says exactly how this is working. Is he like Superman in orbit, getting to use his super speed to we don't no idea what exactly is happening.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of I don't want to say the most troubling part of it, but I believe it's intentionally vague. And I believe it's intentionally vague because any chance you give a character essentially unlimited knowledge, you kind of ruin your story in a lot of ways.
Yeah, here's a really easy example that my wife and I were talking about, because at one point she was reading somewhere about how many enterprises there are, and she's like, oh, the Enterprise D, yeah, it would have been the fifth one, because the first one wasn't called the Enterprise A. The Enterprise A was the second one. And then I was like, technically the Enterprise A was the third one, but at the time they made the show, they didn't know about Star Trek Enterprise. It was not a show that had come out yet. They hadn't designed it yet. So they slightly should have been the E. But that's the kind of thing that if you give Malfurion perfect knowledge of the world, now every time we find a new place, you have to explain why Malfurion didn't mention it. Why didn't Malfurion tell us about this? Because Malfurion wasn't really, if we make it so Malfurion knows everything, then why the heck doesn't he tell us these things? It gets kind of fraught. So yeah, I think Joe's totally right on that one.
Yeah, and it was never fully described how he really saw everything, right? Yeah. Because like Matt said, looking at the world from the view of an astronaut, you're not going to be able to see, it's not like looking at a map. You're not going to have lines. Can you see where this particular country is? And maybe if you have knowledge, you can see the rough outline of it. But it was through the lens of Teldrassil. What does Teldrassil view the world as? Yeah,
what does this giant tree care about?
Yeah, is it just showing a network of roots across the world, which we kind of already knew existed? Is it just showing land masses? Is it like a heat signature showing where pockets of life are?
Yeah, is it showing you here, look at these glowy bits, these are all the forests? We really don't know.
Yeah. And I don't know that we ever will know, because I think it's better that we don't. And again, Malfurion, he's had a lot of time to do a lot of stuff. And he was really great as being the foil the princess in the castle for Tyrande and Legion. And I thought that was particularly great. But ultimately, even if he did, I don't know that he would share. And I think that's the other aspect of it, because look at everything else that's happened to the world. Look at everything that's happened to, the Night Elves, and look what's happening currently. You have Xalatath, who's running around, who can basically be anybody. Why would he share? Why would he voluntarily give information that might be potentially problematic or cause issues if that information got out to the rest of the world?
And there's also the simple fact that we don't really spend a lot of time with Malfurion.
We don't.
It's sure, we're important people and we've worked with him before, but we don't really know him. He's not a buddy. We don't go to his house and just chat about cosmology. He's not going to come to my house and tell me all about, this thing that's happening. We're not that close. So I think to a certain degree, Malfurion's not going to just randomly spread this information. I mean, do you think that Malfurion goes to the average night elf and tells them, by the way, Ragnaros had legs? Pass it on. Everybody should know about Malfurion, about Ragnaros' tiny weird legs. I don't think he these are things that he might talk about with Hamul, but he's not going to tell everybody about it. I mean, for one thing, he doesn't even know everybody. But another thing is what do you need to know about this particular ancient god or this particular mountain stream being important to the natural balance? What's important to a druid or an archdruid isn't necessarily what's important to a bunch of adventurers. That's the other thing. We care about well, dude, I'm going to go into this place full of bad stuff. So if you know anything about the place full of bad stuff, that'd be great. If you could just, tell me, yes, they're all very bad. Anything else? Well, how to kill bad things. What do you want? You want me to give you a breakdown of all their, try setting them on fire, I guess. You seem to love doing that. Okay, got you, Malfurion. You don't feel like you've got anything to contribute. You know how to kill things. So That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying that Malfurion might not necessarily, he might not only not have the knowledge, but what he does know about, say, let's use an example of Avaloran, which we know is out there somewhere, right?
I mean, for all we know, we're there, but we don't know.
But somewhere out there's a place called Avaloran. We might be standing on it, or it might be the next place we go. It might be where the altar, not the altar. Yeah, that's what they're called, right? The end of the Empire, the ones that they're in Hollowfast.
Oh yeah,
the Arathi.
The Arathi.
Okay. Yeah, they might be the ones over there. Whatever. But just what does Malfurion actually know about the place? Even if he does know about it, like, would he be more interested? Oh, hey, there's a bunch of light worshipping, fire using paladins over there, or would he care about the wildlife there? You know what I mean? Like, there's and would we care about that? Like, if he starts telling us there's this amazing species of lichen that only grows on the north side of these trees, and it's got, really good properties for curing, shingle rot. Oh, okay. Does that have anything to do with, like, the giant darkness coming to swallow the world? Absolutely not. Why would I know about that? I mean, I'm as concerned about it as you are, but I'm not like an expert in darkness coming to consume the world. Fair point. Okay, thank you, Malfurion. You know what I mean? It's like, to a certain degree. Yeah, it's the same thing. Why doesn't Tyrande tell us about whatever Elune knows? Because Elune doesn't tell Tyrande everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the thing that you put in there about the fact that maybe he didn't memorize it. I mean, yeah. Probably. There's a certain extent to that, maybe.
You know what we were even missing? Like you said earlier, when he saw it through the eyes of Teldrassil, it's possible that Teldrassil didn't tell Malfurion anything he'd care about. After the initial thing, like, he's telling him, okay, this big thing's happening. The Emerald Dream is in disarray. The nightmare's coming. Here's everything I know. And also, by the way, since I'm a giant tree, there's a lot of really good places, nice shade over here. And he's like, Teldrassil, I love you. Please just keep it down to how I saved the world from Xavius. It's just too much information right now. Okay, yeah, fair enough. You don't want to die. So it's quite possible that Malfurion's just as frustrated as we are, because the tree was just talking about roots. And he loves the tree and he wants the tree to be happy, but that's what happens.
Yeah. Let's move on to the second one here, I think. So talking about Xavius and basically, I guess, why he was there, and that it was the tree being in Azshara and it having the effect of sapping life. That can mean any number of things. It could be something tied to how it's eternal autumn. I want to ask
you a question, though, dude.
Go ahead.
Remember that mage tower, the one that comes up again in the artifact quests and the mage tower quests? There's like a mage hangout in Azshara that's trying to keep some horrible dark force contained.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where he was. I think he was like really underneath that building. I think that they were trying to keep him contained. That's always been my theory.
Yeah, I mean, that's entirely possible. I mean, it's actually probably relatively plausible. But I'm just going back and looking at the original zone, right? Like,
look at the zone. It's kind of, you really can't say, he's draining the life from this place, and that's why it's eternal autumn. Maybe it's just eternal autumn because that's the way it is.
But it is also close to an area that is very barren, right? Even though it is a coastal area. And if I remember correctly, and I haven't gone into Classic and taken a look at this, but the original Azshara zone was not exactly the most lush.
No, it goes down to, like, very quickly when you're in the zone, there's like trees and stuff around the tops, like the areas that are higher elevation. And obviously, if you head towards Hyjal, there's more trees as you go up there. But there's a lot of, like, beach, which is beach. It's sandy or rocky and full of salt water. And the areas between it, before they started shaping it into a giant horde symbol, the areas around it were all pretty desolate. And that's, one of the things that I think you talked about a long time ago was all the Demon Hunter quest stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like the guy who, basically is sending you on quests that end up taking you to the Badlands again. But yeah, there's a lot of blighted and blasted areas in the original Azshara zone.
And I think also, like, noting that is important, that we also don't know what level of life draining it was doing. Xavius is not dumb. He is maniacal, but he is not unintelligent. And if there was a consciousness involved in the tree, which it seems like there was, if you follow the story of it, that consciousness may have made a concerted effort to take tiny sips and bide its time and not cause a massive draining of the life essence of the immediate surrounding area. Because in going back to what Matt said, like with the Mage Tower, you attract attention. And when you attract attention, somebody's going to go looking. And if somebody figures it out,
the last thing you want to do is like let Malfurion know while he's taking his nap that you're doing this, because if he finds out you're there, we saw the last time he fought Xavius, he basically said, I am willing to blow up this planet to stop you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good for Xavius's evil plans if Malfurion drops yet another magical nuke on him.
Yeah. It is very interesting to see what he was willing or not willing to do. And so I don't know. And I think that maybe the book took a little bit of liberty at this time too, because this is also during a time where there was a little bit of a disconnect, right? This is before the time of basically writers being handed a outline. And we know that happened because Richard Knack actually caused that to happen. And so a lot of them were taking liberties and embellishing stuff, and some of it doesn't make sense for in-game. We've talked about this before too. So going back through the Azshara zone, and this is the other thing to keep in mind too, zones in the book are larger than represented in the game, and they have to be because of how the map works and how everything is structured. That's just how it is, right? You have to imagine that the zone Azshara is a large zone in the game. It's larger when you think about it in context of if you were in the game world, right? That's why trekking across like the Barrens is a huge deal, and why only certain people were able to do it effectively. That's why the Torn being Planesriders was a huge deal.
Yeah, I think it's something like the entirety of what we have in World of Warcraft at the time of just the original game was roughly equivalent to the size of Manhattan Island. Like in terms of like your character if you use your character as a roughly 1.8 meter tall human, the rough size of the entire traversable area was like the island of Manhattan. And because that's just how much rendering you could do. Like if you try to render something bigger, it becomes exponentially more computer expensive. And keep in mind, the game came out in 2004.
Yeah.
Computers were like 20 years older than they are now. And there was stuff that they can do now that they could not do then. There's stuff that got developed to do stuff like this because it couldn't be done back then, and that hampered them. There's a reason that like back then they made it so a lot of trees and stuff were basically just matte paintings. They were like two-dimensional because you didn't go to see them yourself. You just flew through them or whatever on a griffin.
Yeah, I was gonna say one of the interesting things, and it was really cool to see them represented in 3 dimensions back in the day. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting, speaking of that, and I think not to go completely sidetrack on a technical aspect, but go through some of the old zones with some of the older trees that haven't been updated, and take a look at how those trees, like go to Duskwood and just take a look at how the trees are. And yes, they have been upgraded during the time of Cataclysm, but they weren't completely removed of their charm. Now imagine them flatter. And imagine it being like that old school, almost like id Software, like Hexen, Duke Nukem sort of 2D, 3D, pseudo 3D.
2.5D, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, not even 2.5D, but it was where the facing of it, the flat facing, followed you. Yeah. So that you never saw the side of it, but the trees were
and that's actually still in presence. If you go play WoW and open a portal and then move around the portal, like spin your character, the portal will always turn so that you see the full portal.
Yes.
Exactly as it was when you cast it.
Summoning portals when you're at the stone do the same thing.
Yeah.
So there's elements of that, but that all that to come back to, the world is incredibly large. And so it also might be a thing that we never got fully represented in the game world because it didn't make sense to show it, right? It may not have been something like you have a tree, like a stick of a tree in like this blackened crater of an area. Like, okay, we have a ton of spaces in the world that look like that already. We have we had Felwood at the time that did that. We had the Blasted Lands that had plenty of areas like that. You could literally walk through Durotar and find places like that. So it may just never have been represented in the game, and it may just been something that until it was necessary to pull it into the world, as far as storytelling goes, that we never would have seen. And,
I mean, look at they've done that with lots of other things that we've actually had come into the game. Like the northern part of the Barrens had a bunch of stuff added when Cataclysm came out. They just put in new things.
Yeah.
And they were, this place was here the whole time. Okay, I never got here. But that's just the limitations of what they could do versus what they did do. And it affects the storytelling in a way. So this isn't entirely not a lore watch topic, because what they can talk to you about in-game is always carefully affected by what they have the ability to tell you, what they can show you. As their ability to show you more things gets better, and you can see that looking at how Mists of Pandaria went back to those zones for the, I forget what they were called, they were like elemental invasion type events. When you went back to those zones and saw new things, and you see that again, even as recently as Battle for Azeroth, when you went back to multiple zones and suddenly there's all this stuff happening in them that wasn't happening before, and there's new places to go that you didn't go before. It's just one of the things that does happen because, the book is infinite canvas. It's just imagination. You don't have to worry about how can we render this. The rendering engine is a human brain, and the programming is the words in the book. They never have to worry about, they can tell you anything. They can say, oh, and then of course there's the firefalls in Azshar, and you'd be like, what? Where the heck are those? I've never been to those. I've been all over Azshar. Where's the firefalls? Well, they haven't had to tell you about them until now, so they haven't bothered. There's a lot of, I want to say, there's a lot of twitchiness to book versus game adaptation type stuff.
Yeah. Now, there's another aspect to this question that I think we can touch on a little bit lore-wise, which is Xavius being trapped in a tree and how he was lost into the ocean with the Sundering and how he was saved. There's a couple different ways that it can be, and I actually don't think it was N'Zoth. And the reason I don't think it was N'Zoth is because N'Zoth worked through agents, not directly, at least at this time, because that's what Azshara was, and that's what some of the other elements that of things under his servitude were doing. N'Zoth being, and I'm going to air quote this, the weakest of them, I think bided his time and laid as low as possible until the events that happened during Battle for Azeroth, which was that opportune moment and what we helped set into motion. I think before that, N'Zoth was just biding his time trying to figure out how to get his agents to move and communicate with them and get them to do things like get into a position where they could break his bonds, because that was the ultimate goal for him. In this particular case, though, we know that while Xavius was a tree, he had the ability to influence things outside of that.
Yeah, I mean, the War of the Satyr wouldn't even have happened without him.
Yeah.
Even though he wasn't capable of actually leading it, he still was the one essentially telling the Satyrs what to do. The fact that there were so many Satyrs is because of him. His influence, his effect on the world.
And think about it, because who grafted him to Teldrassil? It was Fandral Staghelm, who was already being manipulated by the old gods, right?
And who fought. He was one of the leading fighters in the War of the Satyr.
Yeah.
And he even started his split with Malfurion started at that time, because Malfurion was, finally decided, all right, I'll try the pack form because we got to fight these Satyrs and they just won't go away.
And one of the sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's how we even got Worgen, and that's why Worgen had that whole thing about the war with against the Emerald Lords, because the Emerald Lords were the lords of the Satyr. They were going around doing evil stuff, and so there's a lot of stuff where Xavius could have had all sorts of stooges that would have come and got him.
And we know for a fact, and this is going with another book because we have to go into Wolfheart for this one. In Wolfheart, it was actually quoted that Xavius was manipulating Fandral Staghelm and making him his puppet. And that's why he got basically own branch, got into the fledgling Teldrassil. But he was able to affect Staghelm directly, and again, he was a druid. He was tied to the dreams. He was tied to the Emerald Dream. Xavius being also sort of in that that exclusive club of being able to touch the dream and the nightmare in this particular case.
Yeah, and he got in through a back door. He got in by essentially being a tree.
Yeah.
So he was literally sneaking in through the very thing that they were trying to commune with.
The thing that he was turned into by, a druid who wanted to protect the Emerald. Yeah, whatever. We can talk about how this is all Malfurion's fault later. But it's more likely that N'Zoth didn't have a direct hand in anything that happened there, and that this was more or less Xavius maybe working on behalf of N'Zoth, but it would have been the plan all along, right? And it may have involved Azshara, it may have involved Azshara's agents, and it may have involved them setting things into motion. It's real easy to take a sapling and plant it. It's real easy. There's natural phenomena in the world of young trees, saplings that get washed away with their entire root systems intact to be deposited elsewhere and then take root and stand themselves up over time and grow. This is a thing that happens. It's not outside of the realm of possibilities that Xavius figured out how to do that too and get him exactly where he needed to be. We don't know anything beyond him having contact with Staghelm and making Staghelm do his bidding. That's really it. And I don't think Xavius was powerful enough to cause eternal autumn in Azshara, because if he was, Teldrassil would have been a very different place. Because if he could have tapped into all that power of a world tree directly, you tell me he wouldn't? You tell me he wouldn't have taken that opportunity? You have a direct conduit into the Emerald Dream, and you have all of that power. Yeah,
I think the biggest problem for Xavius in that kind of situation was he was ultimately a parasite.
Yeah.
And parasites can't really... There's only so much a parasite can draw from its host without hurting the host to the point where it would be noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that it would... I think in the case of when he got grafted to Teldrassil, he was trying to do it. That was his goal. That's the same reason that Staghelm kept trying to use Moongrass or whatever to keep Malfurion asleep. Because if Malfurion woke up and realized that was happening, there wasn't much... Xavius one-on-one until he started getting power directly from the Nightmare. Xavius couldn't fight Malfurion.
Mm-mm.
He just... For all that, it's funny to see how Xavius treats him in Legion. Part of that's the fact that Xavius is now drawing directly from an old god, which he wasn't before. And that old god isn't it doesn't like Xavius, it's using him. Just like Xavius uses other people, just like he used Staghelm.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot to this, but I think in general, you can argue Xavius certainly he was keeping himself in the game, but he wasn't running the game. And the idea that he could just do whatever he wanted, no. If he could just do whatever he wanted, he would have done it. He would have done it if he could have done it. He couldn't. Or he would have.
Yeah. And now on to the last question, which pretty dang involved. The first attack on the Emerald Nightmare in the book for Stormrage versus what we got later on, and what the difference is between the two. I don't know if we actually know that the world would have been lost had the Emerald Nightmare won the first time around or the second time around. We don't know the impact it would have had. We don't know if there was a failsafe involved. We never let it get that far, right? And saying that the world was maybe a couple hours from total loss is definitely possible. But again, the heroes in the book and us just in general are making assumptions.
Yeah, they only know what they know.
We're not the Titans. We didn't craft this place, right?
I mean, for that matter, there are things that don't sleep.
Yeah.
And although they were, even those who were getting somewhat affected, there are, there are old ancient undead that have been around for eons, well before the Scourge, well before the, anything of Sylvanas. There's liches that outlived the destruction of the Night Elf Empire. There are the Mogu who, come from a time where, when the Pandaren Empire hadn't even been established yet. And they were out there, and they don't dream because they've reverse engineered the Curse of Flesh, and they're fully earthen-like again. They're not dreaming. Think about the fact that only until fairly recently has any earthen been able to dream.
Yeah.
So is it possible that the world would have been lost? Yes. But it's also possible that had things gotten worse, other things would have taken note of it and then acted. Just if for no other reason than it didn't fit their plans. I believe that Stormrage comes out after Wrath of the Lich King, so Arthas wasn't going to be doing nothing.
Yep.
But there's certainly a whole bunch of Titan facilities that might have acted.
We don't
Deathwing.
We don't know what any of the Watchers would have done.
Yeah, Deathwing himself might have shown up. Like, no. I mean, for one thing, he served N'Zoth, but he didn't like N'Zoth. And he would have recognized, oh, you're not replacing me.
Mm-hmm.
You're not getting rid of me so this can work. No, F you. And for that matter, Ashara. We have no idea what Ashara was doing during all this.
We also don't know what she would have done.
She absolutely would have tried to use it to her advantage, because she always does. But how does that translate?
And we talked about this before too, right? Like, Azshara has her own motive. And if anything, for lack of any other way of putting this out there, she wants to rule Azeroth. She wants power. If Azeroth ceases to exist, she doesn't get that. And so, like, the motivation of villains here would have worked against them in that final hour, I think, because all villains, at least most of the ones that we deal with, want power. They want to rule. They want the world, or they want the Titan. And if that's the case, and one other entity is going to get close to getting it, there's no way that they would let them win.
Yeah, and Ashara is a really special case too, because she's working for N'Zoth.
Mm-hmm. She doesn't want to be.
We see all through that it's a push and pull relationship where she is very deliberately testing where his control is and how much of it he has and how can she get around him. And keep in mind, she's not just a very powerful magician; she's extremely intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
It's fair to say that Ashara is among the most intelligent living things on Azeroth at this time.
Oh yeah, easily with almost.
The fact that she doesn't throw herself face first into conflicts isn't a weakness. She would have been sitting back and looking at what was happening and thinking to herself, okay, first I need to shield my people so that they don't get affected by this. Secondly, who are the power players here? Who's going to come out on top if I don't take action? Okay, now what action do I want to take to affect the outcome? I don't want to make, like, say, Malfurion and Tyrande stronger, but I don't want to let the world get taken over by this, this Emerald Nightmare thing, because that would be giving N'Zoth what he wants, and I definitely don't want that. So how do I balance this so that nobody wins but me? And that's the thing about Ashara and other people like her, although she's certainly one of the best ones, that she will be, whatever she does will be taken with an eye towards her benefit.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it certainly looked like a dire moment. Absolutely, it did. You read the book and it's like, yeah, everything's bad. But then again, think about how many times we've been in that situation. Like the Lich King's, running riot over the world, and we're stuck on top of this Ice Crown Citadel, and all this stuff's happening. And then he just blows this up, and it's like, okay, I guess he wins, and then he doesn't. There's something to be said for Azeroth itself sometimes taking a hand if nothing else is going the way it wants. I think that's one of those things you could imagine happening at that moment, would be Azeroth stirring, and we know that Azeroth was having bad nightmares at the time, and after that, because we've seen them, we know that Azeroth was is semi-conscious and having horrible nightmares, and didn't have a speaker yet, so she might lash out. Like, if you ever had a baby throw a tantrum because it couldn't get back to sleep, or even if you're just babysitting, oh God, make this thing stop screaming at me.
Mm-hmm.
And if Azeroth started screaming directly at Xavius, he might not be able to keep going. We don't know. There are a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, and going on the other aspect about the difference between the two wars and the level of weakness of one compared to the other, or the level of strength, I don't know that it's necessarily because of the trees that Xavius was using. I think, if anything, it was more to the focus of Xavius. The second time around, when we dealt with it, when we were going into the Emerald Dream and fighting the Nightmare, that was a personal revenge story. That wasn't, I'm going to blow up the world. That's, I'm going to ruin everything that Malfurion loves. I'm going to take everything from him. His teacher, his friends, his people, all of his safety, his people's heritage. Like, I'm going to take Ysera away from him. I'm going to take the wild gods from him if I can. Like, this was a very targeted, very direct, very personal war. It wasn't necessarily just about the Emerald Dream. And if you notice, like, the Nightmare, while it was making gains, wasn't making as many gains as I think you would expect it to. The attacks were directed and focused and targeted. Corrupting of Emerald Dragons was very specific, something we didn't see in the first war, right? So it became more of I don't want to say a surgical strike, because that would give it, I think, too much credit, but it was just very specifically targeted and honed in on making Malfurion's life miserable.
Yeah, this wasn't a battle plan. It wasn't an attempt at a strategy. It was hate. You ruin everything for me all the time. Hate. Yeah, the Xavius was out to ruin Malfurion, which suited the Nightmare because it took him off the board and could possibly have taken Tyrande off the board, but it didn't really care. This was just setting dice for the future, setting moves for the future. Mm-hmm. And if Xavius got everything he wanted, great. And if Xavius failed and lost, oh well. Didn't quite do as much damage as I wanted, but Ysera's dead. I certainly pulled something off. So yeah, there's a lot of merit in what you're saying there.
Well, thank you. And as far as the number of times that Xavius has died and come back and died and come back, he's never really, he's died once, technically twice. Every other time he's been defeated and sort of transformed, or warped in the same way that other entities have been warped in the past.
Yeah, the first time Sargeras turned him into a big furry monster, and then he got turned into a tree, and those aren't deaths, man. They're just annoyances.
Yeah, and then the final one with him coming back from a supposed death as well, he was essentially an entity of the dream. He was an entity of the Nightmare, which makes sense because at one point in time, he had all the knowledge and skill of a druid. And being able to transport yourself or become a piece of the dream is something we've seen that they were able to do at some point. Not just to sleep and project themselves into it, but to become a permanent part of it. Right?
And also it's interesting to think about the fact that, technically speaking, the thing we saw that called itself Xavius might just be a nightmare of Xavius.
Well, wasn't it the shade? Wasn't it the shade of Xavius?
Yeah,
Xavius?
Yeah.
Wasn't it actually Xavius? It was like the echo of him?
Maybe it was. Maybe it was his ghost. Maybe it wasn't him at all. It reminds me of a different Blizzard game, but I'm going to mention it really fast. When Akarat tells you in Diablo 4, I don't even know if I'm Akarat or if I'm just what his followers thought Akarat would be like. Maybe it's not Xavius. Maybe Xavius is dead, and it's just what the Satyr think Xavius would be like if he was still around.
Yeah, and I mean, going through Darkheart Thicket, if I remember correctly, the last boss there is the shade of Xavius, and the Darkheart Thicket is in the Nightmare. Like it's a component of that, and so I think that's really, really interesting. Because I'm curious, I'm going to look this up if you want to talk for a few moments.
Sure.
But
while he's looking that up, it's one thing to consider. He might be what the Satyr thought Xavius would be like. It might be straight up Malfurion's nightmare. Mm-hmm. That Xavius has returned despite everything I've done. He's back again, and this time he's a straight up servant of the Nightmare. Never once stopping to think to himself, "Wait a minute, does that mean he's just the Nightmare? Maybe it's not even Xavius. It's just the Nightmare wearing Xavius's face to f with me." And maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't. But Darkheart Thicket is absolutely corrupted by the Nightmare. And also, Xavius never really had a sense of humor. Mm-mm. In any of his previous appearances, the dude was, at best, coldly malevolent, even as a satyr. So seeing him as a cackling, giddy, crazed maniac who does that whole Malfurion impression to truly mess with Tyrande some more, that's not really Xavius's style. Xavius was cold and clinical. He was the chief of the Highborn, answering directly to Azshara. The only thing he felt was cold, restrained passion for Azshara and everything about her, because nobody could resist her, including him. Even though he acted constantly, he felt nothing. The only thing that burned in his heart was a despondent longing for someone he knew he could never have. And to go from that, and granted he'd been through a lot, but to go from that to the Joker, which is what he does, is kind of a jump. It's kind of a big jump. I mean, maybe it happened, or maybe he's just what other people think Xavius was like. I don't know. Did you figure it? There's
also, so in the raid he's just Xavius, but there's another thing that I think is interesting here, that I don't know why, but when you were talking, it sort of, my brain did that thing where it sparked some random connections. So this all sort of ties back to the Rift of Aln, right? The Rift of Aln is a deep fissure located within the Emerald Dream, supposedly part of the Emerald Dream, that the Druids think that the dream itself was originated. We don't know that for a fact. In fact, later, especially like the Shadowlands and learning about Ardenweld and items like that, call that into question. But it's also believed by the Druids that it bleeds into the Twisting Nether and the Great Beyond. We can go there to fight Xavius, and that's where Xavius is entrenched. I don't necessarily know that we're in the actual Rift of Aln, or that the Rift of Aln is what they think it is. And I'm wondering if Xavius's first deal with Sargeras, who has a lot of knowledge about things we don't, and that's sort of a theme in this expansion. What if when Xavius was turned into his satyr form, that was just an avatar and the essence of his being was created into what is essentially a pocket dimension? Because, and tinfoil hat here, and I'm just kind of throwing this out, because one of the things that is pretty obvious when we go to fight Xavius the last time is this is his peak power. And as soon as we defeat him, what happens?
I mean, I seem to recall him going, "Oh no, what a world," and gets sucked away, sort of like dissipates entirely.
The rift goes away.
Oh, that's a good point. But yeah, right? Because then you have all that, you wander around and you see Ysera again, but then there's that cave.
But there's a cave with a small shard that you reach in and take that void rose from, but that's it. Like, the rift collapses around you. It's not this vast echoing darkness that Malfurion first saw. It's not just omnipresent. And if it was tied to the Emerald Dream so intrinsically, how did it collapse when Xavius did? Was Xavius the original root of the Rift of Aln? Was that a Sargeras thing? Was that a Sargeras thing that he learned of from his whatever, we don't know what teachings he got from the Nathrezim? Is it tied to that?
Or, actually, now since you've pointed it out, since the original attempt from Sargeras to get through into Azeroth was to use the portal created over the Well of Eternity, right?
Yep.
And that's the root. The Well of Eternity is the root of the destruction of old Azeroth, which tore apart ancient Kalimdor, and thus the Rift of Aln seemed central to the Emerald Dream. The Rift of Aln could very well be the scar tissue of Sargeras' attempt to push through, right?
Mm-hmm. Could be.
Now, if you think about it that way, suddenly it makes sense that Xavius is considering, it looks like he's serving an old god, and the Emerald Nightmare to us is an old god. But what if the old gods were just jumping on the back of it, like using it kind of like you would use a carrier wave to?
Well, yeah, the old gods don't make anything. They don't. Yeah. We know that. We know for a fact that they don't. They repurpose things around them.
But then it makes sense that Xavius is still part of Legion, mm-hmm. because he's still serving Sargeras. Mm-hmm. Maybe he can't, in fact, not serve Sargeras, because maybe Xavius has always been dead.
Yeah.
And that thing is Sargeras and always has been. It's like when he turned him into a satyr, it's not really Xavius anymore. It's just this hollowed out thing.
The only caveat I would say to that, though, is the revenge specifically targeting Malfurion is a little too oddly specific.
But that's the whole thing about what's left of Xavius, right? If we think about it in terms of what do we get? Why do we get to the point where he hates Malfurion? Why wouldn't Sargeras hate Malfurion a lot?
What if it was another failed attempt at the domination magic that they used to try to create the Lich King?
Yeah, maybe. Or
because the Lich King's already proven that you can break away from Sargeras' control, that it's an entity that, with a sufficient willpower, because that's what Arthas did, is able to sort of, take off those shackles.
Here's the thing, though. What if Sargeras could break away from Sargeras? Think about this for a second. Sargeras makes this Xavius thing, puts a piece of his own power in it, twists Xavius into this nightmarish monster satyr thing, and then he lets him go. Like he leaves him to do whatever he's doing while Sargeras is trying to get through. And then over like the course of thousands upon thousands of years, which to Sargeras is not a lot of time, Xavius in this thing becomes etched in.
Yeah.
Like he's carves...
Evolved consciousness, right?
Yeah, it carves into the Sargeras fragment its own nature. And we're talking about why is Xavius suddenly hate Malfurion so much, and more importantly, why is he suddenly the Joker? But maybe it's not sudden. Maybe it's, as you're pointing out, if the thing that dominated Xavius originally was that kind of Titan order domination stuff, what if the only way he could get out of it was to turn himself into somebody else? Because the magic is specific to Xavius. But if you're not that Xavius anymore, if everything about you is wildly uneven from the person you were when they put this thing on you, then you can break it, but at the cost of you. Mm-hmm. You've turned yourself into a nightmare. And who would, we keep calling the Emerald Nightmare, and we keep thinking it's N'Zoth who did it, but who would Azeroth be more afraid of? Who would haunt Azeroth's dreams? This bug thing, or the thing that's coming to get her?
Yeah.
I mean, when Sargeras comes to Azeroth at the end, she's terrified because he's coming for her, and he's not going to kill her. She'd much rather he kill her. He's going to take her, use her, do to her what he did to Argus.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's her nightmare. So yeah, I think you're onto something with this, man. I think, wow, this has been a really good show for you. I've been doing practically nothing. You're pulling the hits out left and right.
Listen, every now and then, the broken clock is right twice a day. Sometimes I have my 7 seconds where my brain lines up.
No, this is some primo work. You've done this like 3 times tonight. I'm impressed.
I can't just get rid of that thought. Like, and I've been thinking about that since this question came in too, is that like the Rift of Alm was this like big ominous thing, especially if you go back through the books, you go through, I believe it is in Malfurion, when he stares into it and contemplates its existence. It's referenced a bunch of times when you're doing stuff for the Emerald Dream, when you're doing stuff for the Green Dragons. And interestingly enough, not so much in Dragonflight, I noticed. The Emerald Dragons didn't really talk about that. They didn't really talk about the nightmare very much either, which I thought was very fascinating as well. They talk about the dream and the pathway and the assault on that and stuff like that as well, but they don't mention the nightmare really. And nobody's really talked about it since we dealt with it. And I'm curious why. Like, is it something where like we've had other things to worry about and so just nobody really sat to consider it? Or is it one of those things where it's fading from memory because it's no longer part of the dream?
It's not being dreamed anymore.
It doesn't exist anymore. The rift having collapsed, that pocket dimension having collapsed.
Ooh. When you forget a dream, sometimes you forget a dream right after you had it.
Mm-hmm. You
wake up and I don't know what I just dreamed, but I'm really upset. That could be what's happening. Like the world, like literally the world is forgetting it because it was a nightmare and now I'm not having it anymore. So yeah, that's actually interesting.
Yeah, nobody's talked about going back to the Broken Isles and trying to untwist what happened there. Like we don't hear anything and I was thinking about that when you're in Belemeth and you're wandering around and you see people that you fought with during that time frame and people from those areas, and they're really not talking about it either. And I don't know, and that could just be the writers and the quest makers, making a statement of, we've moved past this and it's not really relevant anymore. And there's no reason to bring it back up, which is entirely possible. But I'm curious if it's also intentional, if it's something that is leading to us, like, again, like that, like you said, that the whole, you wake up from a bad dream, you no longer remember the dream, you just know something was wrong. Or if Azeroth even remembers it.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because we don't know what Azeroth remembers. And
we can't even ask Magni anymore, which, mild spoilers if you haven't done any of the campaign stuff for the War Within, which at this point I would be wildly surprised if you didn't. But him no longer being the speaker and having fulfilled his purpose, now the Earthen can dream, and the Earthen sort of have that connection. The new Earthen have a connection with Azeroth. Are they able to tell the difference? Are they able to? Is it part of their structure? Do they remember the nightmare?
Well, the thing is that these guys were just born, essentially, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, they don't know it happened because they weren't here. So, but they might remember it. They might be able to remember it for Azeroth if Azeroth remembers it. Which is kind of one of those, okay, does someone tell them to ask? Because they're not going to necessarily know to ask unless somebody tells them to. There's a lot of, I don't know, it's really interesting to think about, like, all this stuff that we're not finding out just because nobody who's in a position to find out knows that they should be looking for it. And isn't that kind of what we're seeing with the Earthen story, with their memory crystals being messed with and their archive being gone?
Yeah.
How much information do they have access to that they don't know they have access to?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there.
Let's look at it from a slightly different perspective, because when we talk about Azeroth, we're essentially talking about a being that is in its infancy, but is also transcendently powerful and on a scale we don't understand. And one of the things that's always been the case here is that we're dealing with an entity that it can dream, that has had bad dreams. We've seen them. We've actually fought them. We go into one point, Magni called us up to Northrend to a new, to a place that had been discovered fairly recently that was, obviously a Titan facility that allowed him to directly interface with Azeroth, and specifically its nightmares. And we've seen them again pop up in all sorts of places. The Emerald Dream itself appears to have been created to allow Azeroth's dreams a place to be. And there's, it's not a universal thing. There's not like Emerald Dreams everywhere, but then again, there are, because there are dreaming beings everywhere. So it's sort of like the specific Emerald Dream that we go to and see is just one part. It's very similar to the Shadowlands. The Shadowlands have multiple realms inside them, but they're all part of the Shadowlands. There's like the Emerald Dream, and then there's the specific realm that is Azeroth's Emerald Dream. And they might be of a different name.
Well, and we know that the Emerald Dream ties back to at least the Ardenweld, right? Like, we know that for a fact. But
we don't know if it's the greater Emerald Dream or the specific Emerald Dream, or if both of them do it. Like, the Shadowlands we went to might have been the Shadowlands for Azeroth. Like, we don't, at one point we're told that the Shadowlands are practically infinite, and we only see like 4 or 5 of them. So, and we know Argus wasn't supposed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me think, like, why? Why is it so weird that a Titan spirit went there? And why, like, we've talked before about this, about we have this idea that Titans are a specific thing, and it's possible that we don't understand that the Titans aren't just limited to being Titan. Like, the World Soul, obviously all these forces are fighting over Azeroth's World Soul, right? Like, all these different things want to get in there and do something to it. Because it's very possible the World Souls don't have to be a Titan.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least the Titan the way we understand them. What was the deal with Aonar and Elune?
Mm-hmm.
What is Elune, and how could Elune be so important to Aonar that when Aonar is quote-unquote killed and her spirit like leaves her body, it ends up on a planet named Elundris? What's the deal?
I mean, we have the rough idea that there was a relationship of some sort.
Yes, but think about what that means. What is Elune? We don't know. What if Elune is just another example of what you could get instead of a Titan? What if there are others? And there's where I start to think about this whole dreaming thing. Because what's a dream? In this setting, in this context, what is a dream? It's obviously something important. It's not just brain waves firing off somewhere. The Emerald Dream is what keeps Azeroth alive. It's what keeps all that nature magic tied up in the Emerald Dream. It's not tied up in Alexstrasza or some life world. It's tied up in the dream. Why is that? Because dreams are possibilities.
It's a whole other Titan engine, essentially.
It's exactly inverse to the Void. Both the dream and the Void think everything's possible, as opposed to the light and the shadow, which are both about only one thing is possible: eternal darkness or eternal light. The fact that the light and the Void are fighting is almost makes sense. Because the Void doesn't want to fight the dream. Why would it? The dream and it basically are just different tunes of the same thing. Think about it like when you listen to a song and then someone says, hey, have you heard that song played in a minor key? And then when you switch to the minor key, it sounds really effing weird, but it's still the same song, right? You don't immediately go, that's not the same song. You just go, wow, it sounds creepy now. That's what the void and the dream are like to each other. And that's something I don't think we've ever really thought about. It's never really been brought up. But, you want potential and possibility. That's where it is in those two places. To the point where when Ardenweald is completely regenerated spirit, it gets sent back to the dream to come back in a form. And we know that other worlds have gods, and some of those gods are the same. Like Elune exists on other planets. So I think a lot of this ties back into that concept of what is Azeroth dreaming for? What are the dreams to do? What is the nature of a dreaming entity when it is this cosmic force? Why is it dreaming? What is it dreaming about? How do its dreams and its nightmares reflect on reality? Because that's the thing. This thing changes reality. Like, if you have control of the world soul of Azeroth, especially the world soul of Azeroth, I think the world soul of Azeroth is a very special beast compared to all other world souls.
Yeah, we know that. We know that pretty rock solidly.
It seems to have the potential to be anything. And it might even have the potential to be everything.
Yeah.
And therefore, looking at all of the stuff going on with the Rift of Aln and the Emerald Dream, think about that might have been not... The Rift of Aln might have been, it might have been the results of Sargeras' attempt to blow through the Maelstrom and to effectively create the Maelstrom. But that in of itself might not have been necessarily just Azeroth being afraid of it. It might have been Azeroth thinking about it. Maybe I should do this. Maybe I should be like this. Because Azeroth has to figure out what it is. And it has to do so without any real help. And it's interesting that we had Magni as the speaker, and then Magni gives up being speaker, and now she essentially has many speakers.
Yep.
She traded one.
And the knowledge that Magni wasn't the first.
No, yeah, exactly. And more importantly, it shows that she still had compassion for Magni. As small as he was, she knew this is unfair to him. I need to let him go. And she does. She doesn't let him go because it's part of a master plan. She lets him go because it's just not, in a weird sort of way, he was like her surrogate granddad, He comes in and he treats her like a daughter. He treats her like a child that he has to take care of. And she recognizes that on some level this is ridiculous. She is a godlike being of enormous power, and he is a tiny little dwarf who's gotten kind of shiny. But at the same time, she's capable of that affection. She's capable of caring about essentially a bug. And, where do you see that? Where do you get that? Mortals. Because mortals, my wife has got all sorts of creepy crawly things in this house that she loves. The Azeroth is capable of a love that gods and immortals and titans don't seem to be capable of. Even Aonar doesn't seem to be able to do it, but Azeroth can. Azeroth loves this strange, weird little dwarf guy because he was nice to her, and he cared about her dreams, and he listened. And so, when she made the choice to spread that out, to choose Earthen to be the replacements, she's not only doing something that they all want, she's doing something he wants, and letting him go back to just being a dwarf, and just being a grandfather to his grandson, and just making up for with his daughter, and the stuff he wants to be doing. And that means that she can think about the possibilities in a way that should concern us, because, she could choose the wrong thing. She could absolutely do the wrong thing, but she understands that she can. She can make choices. And that might even be why Xalatath is so interested in all this stuff that she's doing, because she wants to make her case. Hey, Azeroth, have you ever considered just going evil? Evil's great. Here's all the benefits. I mean, who knows? But I do think it's interesting to look at the Rift of Aln, and interesting to look at that whole idea. This concept of what exactly was it, and why isn't it there now?
Yeah. Well, friends, I think, though, that's going to call it for us here. As always, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, better chance at having your questions answered on our podcast or the Q&A ads free site experience, Again, if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those in. You can email us at podcast@blizzardwatch.com, specify the show that it is for in the subject line, and any special pronunciation of your name inside of the email. If you want to hit us up on Discord, we have 2 channels set aside. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open to everybody. We also have the Patron Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is a extra special place where our patrons can ask those same questions, and we tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. But with that, folks, I do want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.